Hi everyone, welcome back. It's been a long time, and it's been a long time since I've had anything I can show. And what I'm going to show you today is, well, I don't really have time. I'm not really doing a tutorial so much today as I'm doing my Inktober effort in review. So Inktober was something that was started by Jake Parker, I think about 6 years ago. A way to sort of personally challenge yourself to improve your inking skills over the month of October. You try to do one ink drawing a day. And so I'm going to do a little recap of what I did for Inktober. I posted all of these you can find on my Instagram. I'll put my ID Instagram in the description. And I should say up front that I actually put all of these up on eBay last week because some people asked if they could buy them. So I said, sure, why not? So I threw everything from Inktober up on eBay. And sorry for the late notice here on YouTube, but I thought I'd better do some video to let people know. Otherwise, people might get upset. So the auction's closing the 17th of November. So I'll post this soon. I think you have 2 days left if you heard this on the first day. So I'll show you what I started with. I started with a little mech. Mechs for me are always sort of default things I can sketch from memory fairly easily. So it was a good idea and a good thing for me to get warmed up. This was actually a Pilot high-tech pen, one of these guys. And then I came back with a little bit of water, and that's where the little bit of light value comes from, is just putting a little bit of water on there with a brush, and it's water soluble, and it's on a piece of illustration board, and so it can handle the water just fine, and that's what I used for the shadow. Just sort of pulled some value in through there. And use a couple of different line weights. I think the lighter pens that you can buy, the probably 0.3, 0.4, and this one even a 0.25 for the super small lines. So that was kind of my warm-up. Something, sci-fi, sort of can't be wrong with that. Then went to a car. And so I'll talk a little bit about the drawing, some about the perspective, some about the techniques. So I will find this a way to make this a little educational, but mostly just a recap of what I did for the month. And it took me a while, definitely. I hadn't really drawn anything sci-fi or for fun for the last, well, since I finished my books. Actually, for like the last year and a half, I've been doing a lot of 3D work, of which I can't show yet. When I can, I'll post it here, maybe in another 6 or 7 months. So I went to, again, something I know, hot rod. Again, if you make it sci-fi, it's a little more forgiving. And in this concept, I was playing like with a big side window, which is sort of contrary to hot rods, which usually have little slit windows. So that was kind of the fun thing to play with. And this is ballpoint pen. Like usual, my rough sketch at the beginning is done with very light marker. In this case, Copic 1, probably a T1 or N, doesn't matter what, if it's warm, cool, toner, neutral, but just a value 1 is what I use, and that allows me to block in things and sort of investigate proportions before I commit to the ink work. So again, ballpoint pen is very forgiving because you can sort of use it like a pencil because you can draw very lightly. And if you're drawing with a pen and you're not getting the light results that you want, your paper is probably too smooth, or if it's balling up on you. You can see what I have here off to the side when I sketch. There's a Weber pad that's been many times packed over and over. And what I do is, between strokes, while I'm thinking about the design, is just reach over with whatever my ballpoint pen is and just touch it. And usually I touch it and spin. And that takes that bead of ink off the nib. And when you come back, you don't get a big daub of that on your drawing. Now the challenge when doing these, of course, is that I'm trying to make a nice illustration at the same time trying to invent a design that I haven't seen before or that's new in my head. So a lot of times you'll see working drawings, you'll see a lot of extra lines. And so you'll see a lot of designs that actually suffer because I don't go back and correct the line work when I'm trying to make a nice illustration. So I would say when you're trying to make nice illustrations, you usually will sacrifice the design because you won't go back and correct it because you don't want to add the extra line work. And you'll just stick with something that maybe doesn't look as good as it could, is not as resolved, let's say, on the page, because you wanted to preserve the line weight, or the clean lines. So here, example, this pillar coming down, I really didn't want it to run into that vent, but I'd already drawn that, and so they just sort of left it there. And if I was to scan this and then go and start putting some value on it in Photoshop, those are the sort of things that I would clean up and paint out. So my working sketches tend to be not very nice looking as illustrations, but when I'm doing something like Inktober, my goal is to sort of work on my line weight, my penmanship, my draftsmanship, and so I'm usually not fixing things because I don't want to add more ink. I don't want to draw attention to the areas that I don't like the most. So I try to show restraint and just let the design be as it is. And if I get lucky and there have a spark of inspiration that I could use for a future sketch, or a future design, I would consider that a success. So I think one thing is when you're doing these sort of inventive designs and you're trying to do a nice drawing at the same time is not to put too much pressure on yourself on the design side. You sort of have to pick your battles. And if you're trying to pick your battle and do a really beautiful drawing while drawing something original, it's going to be a little frustrating. So just know that going in. And in a lot of cases, I let the design be maybe not everything I could imagine or I could evolve it into being in order to preserve a cleaner sketch. So that's sort of the trade-off. So you're kind of wearing one hat or the other, illustrator hat or designer hat. Like for instance, these wheels, those wheels are quite loose, but I'm not going to draw attention to them. I didn't go back and clean them up actually in this case with a circle guide. And so I really focused in on the areas I liked. I liked the silhouette, so I increased the line weight there. And some of the details added a bit more punch there, but I let the wheels kind of disappear and stay loose because it's all hand drawn. Again, this is the lightweight marker. In this case, looks like a cool marker and ballpoint pen back over the top. And there are definitely things, when you miss it, like this line right here, I don't like the way that hits and intersects with this line. But if I was to make that darker to try and fix it in my mind, all I would do to the illustration is draw attention that I didn't like that, and it would start to get darker and increase in contrast. And what would happen is it would draw attention to the fact that that's the area I didn't like. So you have to sort of, you just get one shot at it because it's ink. And the great thing about doing ink drawing is it forces you to think ahead, and it forces you to pre-visualize as much as you can the result before you commit to it, because once it's there, it's there. And you can only fix it with an overlay, which I'll show you an example of in a few more drawings, or you can scan it and fix it in digitally. This is a little sci-fi vehicle pulling a trailer. I have no idea what it is beyond that. And also, if you want to do a nicer illustration with less construction for the perspective is going to suffer. It's going to be looser. But if you use that to your advantage, what I mean is if you let the lines be wiggly and loose, or you're designing something that's kind of used and clunky to begin with, it's a little bit more forgiving. So you can sort of get away with a looser perspective if these lines are wiggly and loose, and the thing you're designing is also maybe a little asymmetric and a little old and beat up. So here, this is day 7. So you see they're all numbered. So instead of October, they say Inktober, and there's the number, that's the day. And sometimes you'll see dots after, like this one was a 6.2. So that means that was the second drawing that day. So some days were good and I got in multiple drawings. Other days, not so much, and I only got one. This one is a wide-angle lens, sort of fisheye lens. Here's my vanishing point up here to the left. So you see we're very close to the object, very distorted. And I'd say even when I look back at this ellipse is really pushed, probably is too big a change between the degree of this one and the degree of that one. But I'll show you the grid that I had in mind that I did with the lightweight marker. And you'll see that it kind of matches my grid, but there's nothing else in my scene to show you what the grid is doing. So maybe if I had some architecture, grab a heavier pen than this one. If I had some architecture in there, you would see that the grid I had laid out with my marker was actually bending. And these were my verticals, and it looks to touch right in the middle, right, of a square that would go around that ellipse. So it actually matches my perspective grid, but I don't have anything else in my perspective grid, like some architecture, for instance, or a person, maybe standing over here, to indicate that that grid is very, very warped. And then by the time you get closer to the center of the illustration, right, it's become more vertical. And then we can see that that one also lines up, but they are very different because my vertical is bending effectively as I get further away. And then the same would go, over here. Now, it's a little bit odd to be drawing in sort of one corner of a distorted grid. So the grid I'm actually using, right, would be a fisheye lens. So I'd have a VP off in the distance. Then I'd have that left VP, which was this one. And then the horizon in the distance, and then the right VP. Then you would have equidistant VPs above and below. So the grid, you would have your verticals doing this, bending all the way out, like you're using a fisheye lens, like that. And then your horizon line would also bend like this, and above, like that. And then the part that I'm drawing in is actually this part over here. That's actually my center VP. That's the one from my drawing, actually. Sorry, I said it was the other. It's not. My drawing is actually happening on this grid right here. So it's somewhere in there. If I was to construct a box, it's kind of like that. So that's kind of where this drawing is happening. That's actually my center vanishing point. There'll be another one over there far, far to the left. We're not even back to vertical at the center. And so if I include more of the scene, right, then that would start to make more sense. It's one of my favorite views, even though it's a weird thing. If you took a picture, it would be a crop of a larger shot like this, and that's how you'd end up with that part of the grid. So I have quite a few sketches you'll see this month sort of playing with that distorted perspective. The reason I like this one is that the lines coming from my vanishing point remain straight in this grid, and that actually just makes it easier to draw. If you started to work in here and centered your camera here, for instance, then you would have your VP up there, and this 2-point has to use this point and this point, and it becomes actually much more difficult because everything's bending. In this case, you can still have these lines straight when you're doing your construction, and that makes it a little bit easier as opposed to having to bend the verticals, the horizontals, and this line. That would be if my camera was centered on the object. By moving up to this corner, right, I get to keep these lines straight and only bend the vertical and the horizontal. So it makes it a little bit easier. Still a bit of a mind bender, but fun once you get the hang of it. And it's a real camera effect. You could go actually replicate that. You just go take a photograph and you would crop it into one of those corners. This is day 8. Hot rod in here, I switched to marker, but with these looks like Pilot High Tech again, and probably a couple of different line weights. That's probably the 0.25, and that's probably a 0.5. Outlining just the near wheel and doing the traditional overlapping here. It's a bit heavy-handed, I think, with this pen. The ballpoint would have had more variation to it. Like the next day, there's ballpoint. There's more variation to that. I think it gives you a little bit more lively result. But anyway, this is the classic overlapping technique that I've talked about in some of my other videos, where everything that overlaps gets a silhouette or an outline, and that puts it in front of the next component. And then this is heavier than what's behind here, so this overlaps that. So it's a series of overlaps, and that helps to establish depth without using value. In this case, I did use a little bit of value change, but really it's the value of the line, and which equates to the thickness of the line, because they're all black, right? So they're all the same technically value, but the thickness makes it more visible. So classic overlapping. And you'll see I do that in almost all my sketches, is classic overlapping. It's more like a classic figure drawing technique overlap what's near, overlap what's on top of the next thing, and that sets up your progression and establishes depth. There's number 9. And this way I switched to motorcycles now. I don't know for what reason. Anyway, it just felt like doing motorcycles, and the series is going to be all electric. So all the motorcycles you're going to see here are presuming some sort of advancements in technology and making them electric bikes. Here's a side view tip-up of something similar to that previous side view, something like that, and then here it is now tipped up in perspective. So my vanishing point is up above, and I've got a little bit of curvature to my horizontal, so I'm presuming I'm using a little bit of a wide-angle lens here. And this is ballpoint pen, again the light marker, and the light marker allows me to see there's actually a lot of construction in here. You can see that, I don't know if you can see it, but if you could see the very light marker lines, you would see that there's my guideline going back to my vanishing point. There's another one here, some more through here. That was a little bit confused because there's the fork line there as well. And you see there's another one there. There's my verticals. You can see they're converging a little bit down to a vanishing point that's out of the frame, much lower. So that's the grid, and I actually draw the grid in there with the light markers, so it does make these constructions easier, and it makes it easier to do a nice drawing as your very first sketch. And the way to do that is to have patience. Use the marker to do the construction, which makes it easier to draw all the shapes, get them properly in perspective, and then just draw lightly. You can see there's some lines even through here, and they're still light, but they run into each other. And then in this case, I'm using an ellipse guide to go back and clean up the wheels, and all the rest through here is all freehand. And that's just, patience and practice in being able to do that line work. This is day 10. This is kind of mixed media. This is a ballpoint only sketch. The paper also is quite heavy and a little bit, has quite a nice tooth, meaning it's a bit rough. And that allows me to draw lightly with a pen first, like a ballpoint. And then these others are a marker. But actually I didn't do the marker first in this case. I did the pen first, which forces you to pre-visualize and think about where things are going to go. And then you just have to guess at the perspective because there's no perspective guidelines in this case. So you're just taking a guess at it. You can see also it's a wide angle lens again. And you can see I hadn't pre-thought that this truss work was going to run through here because I have a line running right through there. And I drew that first when I was sizing my wheels. And then I decided later to put something in there. And so I had to just let that line stay there. So that's a little leftover from my original construction, which again, with ink, you have to pre-think a bit more and pre-visualize. There's a 10.2, that means it was another drawing on that same day. Again, marker, then a little bit of Pilot high-tech pen, and pushing some line weights again, little quick side view. And again, I'm using the wiggly line here to stay a little bit looser. So it's all done by hand, no ellipse guides or anything. So if you do a clean line, even though it's wiggly and wrong, or loose, let's say, your brain will think it's actually tighter than it really is, just because it's clean. So by making these clean lines up here for that brake disc or the wheel, you think it's tighter than it actually is. But when you really look at it, it's actually quite wobbly and loose. So there's a lesson there in how to make something look tighter than it really is. And that's to just have nice, clean draftsmanship, even though the lines will be wiggly. Your brain will help fill in the rest of it being tighter. Little off-road vehicle, couple of motorcycles. Now I'm back to motorcycles, thinking about side views, trying to get the proportions, thinking about style directions, very, very angular, very minimal. I don't know what this is. I kind of like it. It's got this weird old dirt track kind of feel because of the very vertical fork position. But I like this open frame. I like this idea, and you're going to see it played up in a couple of other sketches coming about if it's an electric bike, maybe I don't have to put the batteries up where the gas tank is. Maybe I can open up some big holes, put the batteries down here, and then have a different silhouette. So that's going to start coming next. few more, ballpoint only. And this one's looks like some sort of roller pen with some marker added after. You can always tell it has the marker added after because you don't see a lot of marker outside the line work, which means I probably didn't draw the marker first. I probably went back and added it second. There's a really loose, that's probably the loosest drawing of the month right there. And that was done while having a coffee at a coffee shop, and I had a really thick, chunky roller ball and just scribbled down some proportions. And even went back with a little bit of white gouache and some orange. The orange is actually gouache on here and on the last previous ones, like that off-road sketch. Here's back to ballpoint. And here's starting to play with the idea of all my mechanicals and the power source, the battery, in a lower module and then a floating seat above. There's a cleaner version of that previous sketch. This was the previous rough one, and then I arrived back to the studio and looked at that sketch and wanted to do a tighter version. So I did that one. And this is now really playing up that idea of the open area instead of a gas tank and putting these are actually meant to be some sort of advanced graphene supercapacitors of some sort. And then that allows the frame to be just this thin blade. You can sort of get the width from where these holes are at. And then a sort of, again, a floating attached seat. And I always like the big icon of a big round headlight with some sort of tech going on inside it. Oh, this is a failed one. I hated this sketch, actually. You probably get this one on eBay really cheap, maybe $5, $2, because I don't like the design. Actually, I like this part right through here. And then if I take away my thumb and you see and look at the rest of the design, and then what's your expectation of what should be under my thumb? And it's not that. So that's a nice, and I do that a lot with designs, is that cover areas, right? So if I do this and I cover this and I look at the rest, I look at the silhouette and look at some of the interior graphics, some of the holes that are starting to be created, and then I build in my mind an expectation of a style or a form and a shape that goes with those, right? And it's different when I pull away my thumb than what I visualize in my mind, then this part's not working. It's no big deal, right? In a development sketch, you would just go back, do an overlay, right? Throw a piece of tracing paper on top of it, keep the part you like, and then start to find something that works with the other elements you've already created. But this is what you get when you're doing an ink sketch, and it's your first and only sketch of this thing the very first time you've ever seen it. You're going to get parts that work, and you're going to get parts that don't. It's no big deal, right? That's why it's called development. Research and development. You research something, you look at it, you try to investigate it, you draw it, and then you develop it and refine it over time. This one's getting a little bit closer to a direction I like. And here's another, again, marker with ballpoint in this case. And another marker with ballpoint. And I did this sketch and somebody commented, because I would share a couple of these over to Facebook throughout the month and my Twitter account, but mostly all of them went on to Instagram. And there were some comments on Facebook that it was so tight, the sketch, and I had said, no, in my mind it wasn't. In my mind it was quite loose. And so I did an overlay of it, which I'll show in just a second. There's a sort of side view tip up again. There's my center vanishing point, and I've got 4 vanishing points. I've got above the horizon, below, right, and left, so that's a fisheye lens, and my image being centered actually on this, my grid. And then I'm sketching a little bit in the lower half, or entirely in the lower half, and a bit more showing the right side as opposed to the left. And so then I thought, well, it'd be nice to try and do one that actually is a little bit tighter. So this is the tighter one. It's on vellum. And vellum is like this vellum, clear print design vellum, and just using ballpoint pen. So all I did was take the previous sketch that I showed you, this one here, and blew it up, printed it A4 or 8.5 by 11 size, and threw it in that sketch pad and did an overlay to tighten it up. So that's my, and then when you do your tightening up pass, it's larger. So when it's larger, you can put in more resolution. And so what I mean by that is you can start doing, working out the tire tread, putting on logos, working out the details, bolts, all that sort of thing. A grip detail. Same with the brake levers. You can get into some of the little fin shapes. You can start to define your headlight forms. All of those sort of things can be added when you have more resolution with a larger sketch. As I was preparing for this video, I found a couple more sketches that I forgot to add to my eBay auction. So this was one of them. This was another. And I actually did a little Photoshop rendering of this interior detail here that you can find on Instagram or on Facebook. And then you see the marker bleeds a lot, so it gets all sort of watery. But you can use that effect to your benefit and add a nice sort of looseness to your sketch. And in this case, I knew I was going to do all freehand, so I left the wheels really loose. And I didn't try to go back with ink pen because that would be hard. And I wanted to just focus on the frame. And so this is the Pilot High-Tech pen using a couple of different line weights. And again, you sort of just have to live with what you get because it's ink. And you're going to get some areas that you like and you're going to get some areas that you don't like. No big deal. Again, right, you just go back and do an overlay and fix it to make the design better. Little loose thumbnail sketch, same technique. Similar technique, this is the vellum again. So it's got that sort of watery look, and then I used ballpoint on top. And that's, again, the idea of this electric lower, batteries, motors, etc., and then a floating seat above. I should probably add those. By the time this is posted, I'll add those onto the eBay offering. I switch now to Sci-Fi trucks. So this is day 19, almost at the end of the month. I guess 2/3 of the way through. And this is actually Mylar, which is very similar to the vellum in that it doesn't really like marker, so it puddles around. The nice thing about that is you can work back into it and kind of erase with a very light value marker. And I worked both sides of the vellum, or the Mylar, and you see it's sort of puddled on the back. And when you see through the other side, it's lower contrast. So sort of working both sides to increase contrast in some areas because it will never get really super dark. And then I used a Pilot High-Tech pen to do the outlining with the pen work. And then that orange is gouache. And this one actually had a little bit of color. It came back after the fact and put a little blue for any area, any parts of the surface where my line of sight would bounce up to the sky, and then where my line of sight was bouncing down towards the ground, put a little bit of warm marker. A few more little thumbnail sketches. This was done inside a Canson sketchbook. And these are loose marker to start, and then go back, and these are all ballpoint pen after the fact. Again, investigating silhouettes, frame designs, packaging, all those good things. This is Strathmore toned paper, and it is marker first, Pilot High-Tech pen second, and a touch of gouache with the orange and a little bit of white here, not too much, just a couple little tick marks for some highlights. And this is, again, marker first, Pilot High-Tech pen second. And it's sort of ready for rendering, really. I could scan this and start to work back in some light areas in Photoshop, or I could keep going with marker and darken up and really get some dark graphics working. You see there's very little has changed. I really haven't really darkened the holes, so I kept it very light and just left it like that, probably because I didn't love the design. These are ballpoint only on Canson sketchbook. It's actually a pretty lightweight paper, but it's good acid-free paper. Of these, I kind of liked that one a little bit just because it was so odd. And in the realm of odd, this one is very odd. So it's got this little bubble canopy. The guy sits up front. This is the rear 3/4. And there's some sort of weird carrying or transport vehicle for this weird module. It's got this big Y-shaped frame, a vertical here, and this receiving V, and that thing maybe drops on there. Who knows? Just fun. Little high ground clearance off-road racer, sort of like F1 meets off-road. It's got all the big aerodynamic assistance with a big rear wing, but it's way high. just for fun, just silly. This is, again, that wide angle lens perspective. And again, the bending would make more sense if you added like stripes on the ground for the road, added the horizon, show the rest of the environment distorting, then I would think it would look more like a camera effect. So just know that when you're playing with lens effects and warping things, just know sort of your limits, and if it looks strange to people, you know how to fix it by adding the rest of the environment. Here's another one. I did a little less warp on this one. I like this rear three-quarter view with the vanishing point sort of above the object and towards the back. It lets you see a lot. It's fun. Again, just make up race cars. A little thumbnail sketch. This is probably the one that I consider, this was probably my best sketching day of the month. What day was that? The 26th. So it took me about 26 days to feel that I could fully have my sketching mojo back after a year and a half of not doing this type of drawing. And I had a design that I liked. I liked the perspective. The construction was tight enough to seem realistic and look three-dimensional. So sort of got all things clicking at this point. Got the marker lay-in, get the perspective view, lens distortion, just enough, and interesting shapes. This one also, ballpoint pen, marker first, then ballpoint pen. You can see actually a lot of investigation in there with the marker. So that was patience. Drawing time, this one probably was an hour, maybe a little bit more. I followed it right after that with this sketch, which was a different technique. This is, again, marker first, but I used the high-tech pens. No, I take it back. My bad. I used this Copic multi-liner pen after the fact, and I used a couple different weights. So you can see very light out here for the far side wheel, and then much heavier for the near side wheel. And then wherever it had overlaps, like this rear wing overlapping. And you can see none of the lines run through because I got to see everything first with the marker. That allowed me to do a nice line drawing, somewhat interesting design, at least it had potential. But that was a good day. So 26th was probably my best day of the month. 27th, switch back to Sci-Fi trucks, a little bit looser, all freehand. This one, both of these, by the way, were cleaned up with ellipse guides for the wheels. I always carry my small set of ellipse guides with me, and that one as well, and then this one not. So when I know I'm going to leave it loose and I'm not going to go back and clean these up, I let them try to leave the lines very light, because your brain will make that look tighter if I don't overwork it. It takes a lot of restraint, right? Because naturally we all like to draw ellipses and draw multiples on top of each other, and somewhere in there is the perfect ellipse, but all you've done is just make it really, really dark with lots of lines, and it's gotten really hairy. And, even though the perfect ellipse is in there, nobody can ever see it. And you've made it super dark, so you say, hey, look here, this is the spot I want you to see the most, right? And it's actually the spot you want people to see the least. So you draw it very light and just sort of let them disappear. Then you focus into other areas like this area. It's more important and something I could draw more accurately. This is, again, marker with those. I was actually liking those Copic multi-liners quite a bit, and I used different line weights as opposed to trying to go over the same line. These were done freehand. I think I went back and actually tightened up just ever so slightly with a little bit of an ellipse guide. But I sort of moved the ellipse guide around to keep it having a little bit of a sketchy look. I don't know what the design is. It's just a fun little sci-fi truck of some sort. This one was inspired by, since I was in Italy when I was drawing these, this was inspired by the Beast of Turin, that old Fiat that has this crazy proportion. Mine even goes a little bit beyond that, a little bit more ridiculous, but all just for fun. That was a ballpoint pen. This one's ballpoint pen as well. Little odd sci-fi vehicle. So that was 30, and then for the 31st, I decided it should be themed for Halloween, even though I was in Italy, where it's not celebrated that much. And so it was the pumpkin vehicle. So these are some quick sketches. These are really loose on lightweight piece of awful paper that I had lying around in the trade show booth at the Luca Comics and Games. So I did these in the booth, trying to figure out a direction for my pumpkin mobile. Here it was with the skeleton, the skull mobile, and then ultimately this is the one that I liked the most, was just this super loose, scruffy little side view done with ballpoint pen. So that's my month, my Inktober for this year. It was pretty fun. Probably try to do it again in years future. And like I mentioned at the beginning, and I'll put the link in the description, all of these now you could win on eBay this week. So have a look if you like. Otherwise, I hope you found this inspirational and you go do a bunch of drawing yourselves and set up your own Inktober. And you don't have to wait a year to do it. You can get started right now. Have a great holiday, everyone. Bye-bye.